And I would like you to think back to your mental state on February 13th, 2024, when it comes to the Washington Commanders. And imagine that I say the following sentence a year later, and that nobody would bat an eye at it. They have the championship potential, the financial flexibility, and the clear and obvious need for pass rushing help. You'd be like, yeah, they have financial flexibility and clear and obvious need for pass rushing. Wait, did you say championship potential? We start today with an article that Bill Barnwell wrote for ESPN.com. Of course, one of their senior writers, one of the smartest guys writing about football in the entire business. And he did an article that described the Myles Garrett sweepstakes. And ultimately, at the end of this very long article, he has 3 teams that he thinks should be the biggest contenders for Myles Garrett. And amongst those 3 teams, guess which team he says should be the number 1 landing spot for Myles Garrett?
The Washington Commanders.
Indeed.
Yes, sir.
Indeed. He says
we are the Commanders.
Should pursue Myles Garrett. The deal that he offers up, and I think what's cool about Barnwell's article, and this is in classic Bill Barnwell in-depth fashion, where he's got all of the angles, because it's not like a Commander should go get Myles Garrett article. It's here is a complete guide to the Myles Garrett sweepstakes article. So he's got some historical precedent in terms of other stars that have been traded around the same time in their careers and what the trade returns were. And he goes in depth on some of the caveats, like Darrelle Revis was a much cheaper trade, even though he was at the best corner in football at the time, defensive player of the year type of guy, but he was also coming off a torn ACL when he got traded back in the day from, I believe it was New York, the Jets to New England. Randy Moss was around the same age when the Oakland trade, but whoopsie daisies, the Raiders thought that Randy Moss was done, and then he goes to the Patriots and has the best season of his career. So like there are some caveats on some of these, but you go back in time and there's 3-team deals and all that. He then talks about some of the teams that could potentially get along or be a part in 3-team trades and why they could be appealing. But he ultimately gets to the soup and the nuts of it at the end of it and says that the Washington Commanders are his favorite team to he's got like a maybe group, the teams that put Garrett puts over the top, and those are the Bills, the Lions, the Chargers, and the Eagles. And then he just says, yes, the sweet spot. These are the other teams that should be interested in a Garrett deal and have one key advantage over the other organizations I mentioned above: a cheap quarterback. It's easier for teams on rookie deals that are hoping to compete to go after him, given that they're paying their signal callers about $40 to $50 million less than the going rate for veteran passers. That's a lot of salary to spread elsewhere around the roster. So the 3 teams are the Chicago Bears, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Washington Commanders. And he starts the Commanders right up with, I've saved the best candidate for last. The Commanders are the most obvious and consequential landing spot for Garrett. They have the championship potential, the financial flexibility, and the clear and obvious need for pass rushing help. And I would just like to, before we go any further with this discussion, Anthony, say that it is February 13th, 2025. And I would like you to think back to your mental state on February 13th, 2024, when it comes to the Washington Commanders. And imagine that I say the following sentence a year later, and that nobody would bat an eye at it. They have the championship potential, the financial flexibility, and the clear and obvious need for pass rushing help. You'd be like, yeah, they have financial flexibility and clear and obvious need for pass rushing. Wait, did you say championship potential?
Yeah.
We are 1 year into this. This time last year, Jaden Daniels was 2.5 months from becoming a Commander. And this is where we are. Speaking of Daniels, Barnwell writes, all of this starts with Daniels. The rookie sensation is still on a bargain deal for 3 more years before the Commanders would even have to consider a 5th-year option. That means 2027 is the year that we're concerned about in terms of, oh, God, we got to pay the quarterback a lot of money. They have $80 million in cap space in 2025. And again, that $80 million is worth caveating on 2 fronts. one, it's not as much as it sounds like because they have so many players they need to sign. It's also more than it sounds like because John Allen can get cut, create an extra $16 million to cap space at $0 in dead money, and that feels very, very likely that could happen. You also have to think about how they were able to get most out of guys like Dante Fowler, who was on a $3.3 million deal last year. Dorrance Armstrong, he's obviously in-house. And then you've got Allen Payne and Newton already on the inside. They need that chess piece. They need that movable piece on the outside. And Barnwell talks about how that has always been the key to getting the absolute best out of a Dan Quinn defense, is whether it's a Bobby Wagner in Seattle first time around, like young Bobby Wagner, whether it's Micah, guys like Earl Thomas, like having these movable chess pieces is how you get the most out of a Dan Quinn, or in this case, a Dan Quinn inspired and assisting Joe Witt defense. And so I think reading that article was interesting because The Athletic put out that thing that we talked about, a week ago or whatever it was, where it's like 2 picks and a player, or two picks and 2 players even. And Barnwell seems to think it might just be 1 player and 1 pick, that the starting point is going to be a first rounder. And I think if you're Washington, that's going to be harder to sell because your first rounder is 29. So you might have to be, giving up, what was I going to say? You might have to give up like 2 firsts, where another team might only give up 1, because if you're, for instance, fighting with Chicago and Indy, Chicago's got a top 10 pick. So how do you make your deal sweeter? And I think the ability to potentially get a third team involved, or the potential to include a larger package because your pick just is not as valuable, might be, that ultimately I think is going to be the decision that Adam Peters has to make if the Browns open up this trade sweepstakes.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at it from a Commander standpoint, though, and what, Adam Peters was able to do and what he's done, in the past in terms of building through the draft, is also, that balance of whether or not we can find, not to say we're going to find a Myles Garrett, but we know if we do end up, pursuing Myles Garrett, the risk of giving up 2 firsts or, 3 firsts or whatever the case may be. I think we were talking earlier, and I wouldn't mind giving up 1 first, maybe even 2. But I think when you start to, talk about more picks and, multiple rounds and things of that nature, I think that's where I get a little scared, just because.
For sure. You have to replace those guys.
Yeah.
Because Myles, for as great as he is, can only play 1 position. He can't play, or 1 position at a time. He can't play, be your left tackle and your defensive end and your defensive tackle. But none of the things that you give up are going to turn into Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
None of the individual pieces. All of them are so much more replaceable than Myles Garrett. It's ridiculous. And if you're Cleveland, that's why they're currently like, we're not trading him, right?
Yeah.
They're like, if we give up Myles Garrett, we've lost the trade because we've given up Myles Garrett. Now for them, they're also not winning anything anytime soon. So for them to give up Myles Garrett now, get maximal return, and push the target down the road is actually probably the smart play. But for a team like Washington that some fans seem to have already forgotten, that are so hesitant, we can't mortgage the future. Like, future's here, pal. Like, they made the NFC Championship game.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say you should go crazy, not to say you should do short-term everything, but you're not trying to kick the can down the road. You're like, oh, there's the can. We found it. Let's see what we can do right now.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.